Doing fine. Good. Starting on family reunion plans. Commissioner Frost and Commissioner Belcher.
Besides that,
The morning as people sitting at their wedding, so happy to be together. Looking forward to the next funeral.
We're at our first meeting of the Facilities Committee with the CRA, and put an agenda in front of you. Thought we could talk a little bit about maybe getting somebody to, amongst our members, to chair this committee. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about the project going on at Lake Julian, to bring you an update on one of the newest projects that's in the works. The property in Arden, I wanted to talk to you a bit about, with your permission. Then look at our capital improvements projects, and then let y'all discuss, let the committee talk about priorities, and then start looking at what else y'all might like from staff, what other information you might want, and then look at where we go from there, and look at our next meeting time, which sounds like maybe not exactly at 8 o'clock. Right, Matt? Okay, that's it. That's all right.
Well, I'd recommend let's pass on the chair until we see if we get our two commissioners to join us.
All right.
And let's move to the Lake Julian expansion project, which is something that is moving very, very, very quickly as of this week. So I'll let Fran take it away.
We had an opportunity to work with a new restaurant that's opening in the location where the boathouse was, out there on Long Shoals. And as part of that, in working with the county and with us, they're looking at needing additional parking. And behind that restaurant is actually not on county, on Duke Energy property. All of the property for Lake Julian Park is Duke Energy Progress property that we are long-term recipients of a lease for. So it's not owned by the county, it is Duke. We've had a lease, I think, since 1975 on that piece of property out there. We've had the main part of the park, and then back off of Hendersonville Road, there's the back part of the park, as I call it. And this is actually an interesting connection because it will allow us to hook the main part of the park back on around to behind where the boathouse, the new Wild Wings restaurant is. So behind the restaurant, for additional parking, that's on county property, county leased property. And behind that, there's some nice space that will allow us to come out of the main park and add a beginning of a trail system and expand about almost, I don't know, not quite a half a mile of trails coming off the main park around back behind the restaurant and what we're calling right now very carefully the Lake Julian Park extension, because it's an extension of what's going on. We're real happy about that. That's moving very quickly. It was at the commissioners meeting Tuesday night was the acceptance of the commissioners of a $150,000 donation from the restaurant to help with that park, build the parking lot and help extend that park back behind there. So there's that money and a little bit of money. You want to talk a little bit about the bid process and where we are, Steve, on that?
Sure. The owner of the Wild Wings, in order to see that aesthetically for his business, that this would be something that would be advantageous to them, made a contribution to the effort. So we greatly appreciate that. That's going to cover the majority of what needs to be done on the property. But it does benefit him as well, because where the parking lot is currently, there's really just not enough parking spaces at all. In fact, when the boathouse was there before, they were actually having to use other parking spaces. So Greg Israel to the county finance department were able to send out bids to get the work done. And those bids came in. We reviewed those yesterday, at least the dollar amounts. I've seen the full package, and just so you know how thorough the county is, the bid package that went out was 191 pages long. So it covered every detail to cover the county, so I think we all have to appreciate that.
Go back, count our pages, see if we can compete.
Yeah. Oh, and I think the good way they did it too, they broke it down into component items, so that way we could go through and itemize them, and if it ended up that the cost was just going to be too exorbitant, then we could have gone back and said, well, we think we can still move forward on this project if the vendor is willing to do so. So we liked the way that was set up too, and requested that happen that way. And but fortunately, it does look like this is 100% completion. And those came in yesterday, we reviewed them. So after we met yesterday, and Ed and Fran reviewed the information, said looks like we're ready to go. So as far as I know, we sent the information off, and of course the county attorney is involved. There's staff and legal counsel for the county are involved, and they are hopefully reviewing it, as is the finance department, who will go through the documents and review them. And as long as everything's in order, then we move forward.
Really excited that,
Do we have maps or anything that we bring?
I did not bring those at all, and I should have.
That's good.
No. The property at this point will be additional parking spaces, and then, like I said, a trail area behind there. And then eventually, hopefully in the next 6 months to a year, we'll add a dock, fishing dock, in cooperation with North Carolina Wildlife Commission. And then maybe some other amenities down there, a shelter or some areas also down there to allow the public to park there and to come onto the park. And also for...
Yeah, this, before I forget to add
Yeah.
too, this also meets the requirements for what Duke Power requires in relations to setbacks. Also, the egress and ingress information that has to be required as part of the regular coding for the county, but also too the silt fence and all that. I mean, everything's in order. And the thing we were glad to see too, that it does include removal of debris and stuff, because we assumed that area had been grown up for a while. So we assumed that hopefully they'll take that on as well. And once they cut the trails in, the removal will be a part of that as well.
And so the trail just kind of end abruptly at this point until a dock is built?
Well, right now it comes in the main park and it stops. And this will come around and loop, and then loop back around.
Oh, I see.
So it will run a loop around there. Eventually it would be nice, and it is, to be able to maybe come all the way around, but that's in the distance. That would entail going back out on long shoals, and then somehow being able to work with some of the neighboring properties to get to the back part.
The gravel part, the parking lot part will be gravel, but we'll have concrete edge curving. And I think what's going to be really neat is that the trail parts are actually going to be paved, and they'll have to meet certain gradient levels to ensure accessibility for handicap. And it's also wide enough for us to get a truck on if we need to.
This is, I think one of the things that's cool about this is that the property, in other words, the restaurant owner saw the potential in this, because the site of that old boathouse restaurant is on a point at Lake Julian. So the actual location on the lake is one of the more beautiful spots, and it's right off of Long Shoals Road, so it's quite visible. And it would really, it's going to be more visible, that portion of the park, to the public than the rest of Lake Julian Park is, because from the road you can actually see the lake there. So this will be, I think, it'll be quite attractive. And we're also, this is the first time the county has done this sort of private-public partnership. There was a change in state law in the last legislative session which facilitated this. So, in effect, the county is managing the project. It did the project according to our rules. The donation from the restaurant owner was received by the county, but in effect, it has become now a county project to finish it out. And there's a memorandum of understanding that's being drawn up in the county legal department that will essentially specify who is responsible for what. If you're familiar with Lake Julian Park, where the Asheville Rowing Club facility is, this is where that connection will be made. And there's some existing fencing there that will in effect have to be rejiggered to create a gate. But this will connect. So if you park in Lake Julian proper now, and a lot of people use those roads to walk, you'll be able to walk through the gate into what we are, calling the Lake Julian extension or the Wild Wings property, and go around to the point. And it's quite, I think it'll be quite a spectacular bit of real estate.
So you can actually get some real exercise walking out.
Yeah, it extends the walk. The other thing is just having that connection with the restaurant is that should feed people into the park. Once it opens up just the development of yet another section of that shoreline. So the whole project, lock, stock, and barrel, is going to be less than $200,000. And we're hoping we'll pursue some separate grant funding, hopefully, to get the dock. When you come out of the back of the Wild Wings restaurant, you'll be overlooking the lake and the trail. So I think it'll look really good.
And we received 4 bids from, I think, 4 reputable agencies, and they varied in prices from mid 160 to 240, I think. So,
And so this basic construction will be done this spring. The push right now is, of course, the restaurant owner is eager as he can be to get that parking lot built. So we expect that the push will come first, get the parking lot ready to go, and then once warmer weather comes, the drain system.
I love that we can talk about this as one of the first pieces of trail that we've done, and also is not that is in keeping with our Greenway Master Plan, which would show trails that would come out off of Lake Julian and on around. So it's a great start. I think it's going to be a fun project when it gets finished. I love the fact that people will be able to park there and then walk to the park, not just walk from the park over to the restaurant. So it's a restaurant area. So I'm really happy that this is happening, and it is happening very quickly.
So let me ask you, go ahead.
It'll be completed by May or June, something like that. Is that right?
50
about 90
days
days.
Was it 50 days?
50 days.
50 to 90 days, yeah.
And how long does it take you to gear up your contract, awards and all that?
Not so sure.
This was actually done on informal bid, so
Oh,
I think that
pretty fast.
I think that contract could probably be done next week.
Yeah, that's good.
Because the contractor apparently is ready to go.
Of course, the weather's going to have some factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will, but it's perfect timing to get in place before your busy season. That's great.
And I guess, I'm not sure what the opening date on the restaurant is.
It was supposed to have been mid-December, then he pushed it up, and he's definitely wanting to be open before Super Bowl, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. But it's doubtful we'll have that parking lot before the Super Bowl.
So I'm curious then, was this something, the $200,000 that will come from us, that's not the $150,000 from the restaurant owner, I say I was in the county. Is that something that was already in the budget? Is there some sort of fund that we can tap into or something how does that work?
Well, the 150, the whole project, we figure will be a little less than 200. 150 is the donation.
I see, so
From
the
the
50
restaurant owner.
Fantastic.
The balance of that is coming from a capital account in the county.
I see.
So they'll move the money into our budget probably pretty quickly to cover that. But the whole thing you're looking at is less than 200, 150, which is.
What's the dock? You said the dock is sort of a supplemental addendum. Should it be private funded? Well, what's the tag on that?
Don't know yet, because we work with North Carolina Wildlife Commission, when we did the one out at Owen Park, it cost us the cost of constructing it. But everything else was provided by the North Carolina Wildlife. So it was a very reasonable priced project.
And that was a floating dock.
They're floating docks, and the county maintenance, county general services department did the installation piece of it, did the construction. accessible ramp from the parking lot at Owen. So we've had conversations with North Carolina Wildlife Commission. They're booked solid until springtime, but we're hoping maybe this summer we'll have.
Come back into play.
So looking to the future then, as far as, excuse me, I'm battling a cold. If we have opportunities arise from the community, say in various nonprofit groups or business owners that want to do exactly what Wild Wings has done, where would we get the money if we wanted to do something in conjunction with one of these groups?
I think there you'd be looking at first, what's the size of the project? So is that something where within the CRA budget, there's any flexibility to work with? Typically, larger projects, and I guess in county terms, this is a relatively small project. That's where that capital plan, that what we call the CIP plan, comes into play. On a smaller project like this, it really just depends on, first, the level of interest. In other words, if this board is interested in pursuing it, the Board of Commissioners is interested in pursuing it, and it's a relatively small amount of money, often that can be found. In other words, it's the equivalent of looking behind the sofa cushions to see.
And it may be we prioritize.
It can be, whether there is, in effect, your first place you look is if you've had existing projects that are largely complete, well, is there any money there? Is there any money there that can be moved? But, so it really varies case by case by case. I think in this instance, what moved it very quickly was you have the restaurant owner who's willing to make a more than a match. In fact, this is going to come up to between 2/3 and 3/4 of the total project that is put in. So that, of course, moves it faster. So the county generally has been pretty flexible in working with us. Bigger projects are the ones where you really look at that long-range projecting.
Would it be wise for the CRA in the future to try to come up with some kind of pot of money that was just for these sort of things that arise?
I think it could be, but I would say this, at the meeting next week, the full board meeting, Wanda Green is going to come, and most of the agenda of that meeting is Wanda talking about finances. So since we're still at the stage where we're operating as a county department right now, the rules for us are still either different or not yet fully developed. Next year, when the CRA will be operating, we presume with more financial independence would be the time to have that conversation. I wouldn't know what to advise you.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we're basically talking about capacity building.
Yeah, because one of the things that I'm getting at this is, and I'm a firm believer in public-private partnerships. I realize sometimes they don't work, and I'm not, blind to that. But there are a lot of people in Asheville that want certain things and are willing to work for them, and they have been for years. And I've seen their frustration over the years of not getting anything done because of lack of funding or lack of organization on their part. To be fair. But it would be nice to have something like that so that when a group organizes, say in East Buncombe, and they decide they really want a section of Greenway built and everybody's for it, it would be terrible for us to miss that opportunity. So, obviously this will be a success if the people feel like it's a success, not particularly if we do. So they need to see things getting done. So I do feel like, maybe I'm preaching to the choir, that this should be a priority for us to start a fund or a pot of money or something that we can then use to do that.
It's really kind of a strategic overlay, I think, under your funding, because when you introduce the whole public-private component, you have donors who come into play like this. You have to react differently than you do in a normal, just pure governmental funding model. You need to have money strategically available so you can capitalize and leverage this kind of thing. I think you're exactly right.
Because I know a lot of people in the community who approaching me, just like they've approached Karen about community grants and such. People ask me, because they know my past is in greenways, how best can we get this done? What's the process? What's actually going to realistically happen? I think they're a little bit skeptical. So it'd be nice to know that we were working towards having some way of leveraging these groups who I know are organizing, and some of them are already organized and ready to fundraise and do some things that I think we need to help them with.
Is it too soon to talk about the long-range plan?
I think this is something where really how this evolves long-term will be the relationship between the long-range plan, and in fact, a lot of the long-range plans that we have now is reflected in that capital projects list. That's the result of the previous year's planning efforts, is trying to maintain a connection between the projects that arise and affect these, what may end up being projects of opportunity, so that there is some connection to the long-range plan. In greenways, that will be particularly important because we have a greenway, a pretty well-developed greenway master plan in place. So, for example, if a group makes a proposal for a greenway, and they're even at the point where they're willing to bring some money to the table, probably the first test is, well, does this relate to the existing master plan? If it doesn't, then that's going to be a higher standard, in effect a harder path to pursue to get that done. And in most respects, I think in parks and recreation and in greenway planning, one thing we don't lack for is existing master plans. For pretty much any facility, when we're talking about the issue of swimming pools, well, there have been literally a generation of master plans developed for that so far. So I think it really becomes a matter of probably the size of the project, the readiness of the community group or organization to pursue the money that's being brought to the table. I think the dynamics on these are going to be different, case by case. As the CRA itself develops, because part of the projection of what will happen with the CRA as a public authority is because it has that separate property tax, is that theoretically over time it will develop a fund balance. So in effect, sort of a mini version of the county in that respect. So that pot of money could be there. That's probably several years down the road before we get to that point. So this is, I think, really exciting because the structure that we're looking at here with the CRA is potentially more flexible and for that particular type of smaller project to be able to respond. But right now, I can't tell you how it's going to happen. Some of that is, I think, would be good questions for Wanda next week.
We probably continue this discussion of our priorities, discussion of priorities. Go ahead and move forward.
The other project I wanted to bring to your attention and talk to you about today is one that's been in the works for a while. I've mentioned this project a couple times, this piece of property, and wanted to just show it to you today. Because it's a little bit warmer in here. This is a piece of property in Arden. I think the most dramatic visual I could show you is if you flip over to the third page.
That's my excuse. This is about a block of my house. This is why I was waiting for you. I thought we were meeting there.
If you look at this piece of property and you see the blue area, that is the piece of property we're talking about. When the family came and made the proposal, and I think it must have been back in 2006, around in there, and said, we have a piece of property we'd like to have preserved. And it's 30 acres in the Royal Pines area. Off, as you, I think you mentioned, George, off St. Andrews, and on the top side, Rhododendron Road, at the very top of the mountain. This piece of property is quite steep, as I believe I've told you before, but look at how it's located in the area around it. It's just it's a beautiful opportunity that family, Rayanne and Robert Collier, brought to us. Second side shows you a little bit of, on the back of the first page, it shows you a relationship that's hard to read, but if you see Lake Julian there, which I guess I could call this a Lake Julian extension project also, back up where you see the number 3, that's where that property is. So it is from the top of that mountain, you can look down on Lake Julian. It's not that far away from the lake. Back on across the other side of the road from, other side of the hill from Ross Cragen Garden, I believe it's called. The other page I wanted to show you is part of this acquisition was done, this piece of property with 2011 with Parks and Recreation Trust Fund dollars, and I have those numbers a little further on. The pictures here just show you what I wanted to tell you. This is an undeveloped piece of property. It is trails that have been maintained, about 2 miles of trails up in there that have been maintained by the family for years and years and years, by the Collier family, and specifically Mr. Collier and Mrs. Collier. So in 2011, we got a Parks and Recreation Trust Fund dollars to help purchase the property. The cost of the property was $300,000. Most of that came from Parks and Recreation Trust Fund.
What is the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund? Who manages that?
It's managed by the state, and I'm going to say by, why was she asking that question?
Sorry.
That's all right.
Is it a checkoff fund, or is it, how is it funded? Is it funded by appropriations?
It was funded by real estate fees, as I understand it. So, and that's changed in the last year or so, how that's funded and how that funding goes, and has been, there's a committee, state committee, we have a local representative on it now, I understand, and have through the years. I need to check that. I'm going to throw out a name and I'm going to be wrong, so I'll need to get that for you.
Who is that local representative?
My understand is Ann Babcock.
Oh,
Is
really?
now on the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund board. That's what I was told. Which is great news.
It is, yeah, it should be good.
Then last year, we got more trust fund money on Parks and Recreation Trust Fund to build a trailhead. So up at the very top of the property, and I do mean the top of the property, the very top of that property, we're constructing a parking area that will be a gravel parking lot with 1 handicap parking space. That will be hard surfaced. Project's been going on a while now to try to get to the finish with the building, because there's a retaining wall that's going in, there's a fence above that that's having to be constructed. And this piece of property will not be developed. The plan is not to build on it. Our plan is not to put recreational features on it besides hiking. It's not going to be a biking trail. It's specifically a hiking trail. The steepness of it is,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say straight up and down, but it's
Pretty
steep.
close.
But it's a steep piece of property.
It's impressive.
And if just that first picture down, the power easement, and that's across that property also, gives you a kind of idea of, it's not a gentle slope down.
Sure.
Where is that dome house on this map? Is it right next to the boundary?
It's all the way at the bottom of down there, next to where the Colliers live. He and the Colliers are very good friends, down at the very bottom of that piece of property.
So kind of down here in this corner? Is that
At the
right?
very bottom, yes.
Yeah, okay.
off Desiree Drive, I believe, that comes off of St. Andrews.
Yeah.
I think I've said that
Oh,
name.
yeah. Kind of like, it's kind of in the form of a hot air balloon.
It's
It's
an
an
incredible,
interesting house.
an incredible structure. And the Collier family, Mr. Collier, and Mrs. Collier, still live in that house right at the bottom of that property.
Oh, do they?
Yes.
Okay.
And several of their children and grandchildren live in that area also. So the family's very supportive of this project. And we have, I think, another year before we need to open that park. When you use Parks and Recreation Trust Fund, it stays as a park forever in the deed. And it is, needs to be open within, I think, 3 to 4 years after you've gotten the funds. And so that's why we're finishing up the trailhead now, to be able to give people a chance to access it, because the access will be from the top.
So the county match on this project covering the same place as the county match on what we're talking about?
Yes. From existing funds and interplan. So I guess one of the reasons I'm asking this committee, or talking about this, is because this one's moving, this one's gonna be finished up. I'm hoping this spring we're gonna open this park up, this preserve. And I would like to ask that the committee consider taking to the board next week the request that this piece of property be named, officially named, the Collier Cove Nature Preserve. Right now, we call it the Collier's property, and it's not named. And I gave you the county naming policy in your notebooks, I think at the last meeting, so that you can see it's not, that it is allowable to name it after a family that's made a significant donation. The Collier Cove, that's what the family has called it for a long time. And we think the proper procedure here would be to have, with your permission, to say, yes, that makes sense, that it come as a committee recommendation to the board next week, for then it to go to the commissioners for their approval.
Seems to me that's a pretty reasonable designation, just on the face of it, because it is a fairly steep and somewhat inaccessible property. And the preserve kind of implies, to me, what it is more than a park or that kind of designation would. I'd be in favor of
And the name rolls off the tongue.
We're not talking about fencing the property, we're talking about putting some signage up. It'll be mostly, you have to, once you know where it is, you can find it, but until you found it, it's sometimes not the most obvious. It's not on the main drag. But we understand that there are several types of animals that cross that piece of property. And the neighbors and the friends of this family would like that to stay that way. Not fenced, not developed, natural setting.
Great. So that's something we have to do a formal motion in this committee to approve that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. We don't have any of our procedures yet. Maybe we want to do it again.
Yes.
We probably should. Probably should have some kind of formal action that we take.
I move for the, call it the Collier Cove Nature Preserve,
Second.
and recommend it to
Second that. All in favor, say aye.
I think we just got a chair.
It sounds like a unanimous vote.
It's so natural.
They just stand around and look at each other.
Thank you. I'll look forward to an opportunity of, when we open this park, to have the first real opportunity to have a piece of property named by this department and by CRA, and be able to open it up and christen it. So that's not the right word. We don't christen parks, or to unveil it for the public.
Yeah, these are two really nice projects that sort of come out of the blocks with here, I think, because they both represent a true partnership between families and businesses and the county and creating something good for everybody. I think they're great. They're really early indicators of what we're trying to do.
It was quite an interesting day when Robert and Rayanne showed up at my office and said, we really want to talk to you about a piece of property we'd like to see stay
Yeah.
in the county. So that was, and I was brand new, so I found it quite daunting. But they've been very patient, and the commissioners have been interested in seeing this also, so I'm glad that y'all think that also.
This property is not in any way, I guess it's probably elevated enough, it's not in any way impacted by what they call
Steep slopes.
no, well, that too, probably, but also the brownfield project that's nearby there.
Haven't heard that there is.
I can't think of it, it's USA or something like that.
Oh, no, that's Mills Gap Road, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's impacted some of these surrounding sort of code.
Yeah, this
CCS.
is well above.
It's well above it right now, that's what I think.
Yeah, I think all that's been trickling down here.
Yeah, no, the topography right there is really interesting, it's tricky.
All right, good. Shall we look at the, did a little bit of a change since the last CRA board meeting and reordered this at the, as discussed. Oh, yeah, thank you. This is still a draft. It takes the CIP plan that y'all saw, and we discussed and we talked about the interest in having the Zoyger replacement pool as the priority in 2015. And then the east, the replacement or addition at East Asheville as the second on that list. So this is the reordering a little bit of following the meeting, board meeting.
So is there, excuse me, so what is happening, fiscal year is July 1?
Yes.
Okay. So what then is happening for the rest of fiscal year 2014, up till the first 6 months of the year? What is, since we've moved all these dates, what are the priorities up to that point?
I think what we're finishing up, the Collier property, and we're finishing up, those are the projects we're working on. As far as 2014, I don't believe we had anything in the capital improvement projects that we had, we were working on.
And same on the library, with no active projects
Good
this
to know.
year.
Everything's been moved back.
There were a couple of projects that were finished up. The last big library project was the Pack Library renovation. These were things that got funded before the crash, and so were actually done during the economic downturn. But really, neither renovation or library had projects approved or and funded in the last few years. So we're looking now at what amounts to a backlog of projects, some of which have sat on the CIP list for a number of years, like the East Asheville Branch. That now we've got to pick up and see how quickly we're going to be able to move forward on these. And so part of that, I think the focus of the board is over the next few months is looking at these, in effect, pre-identified priorities that are there from the past. We've already talked about two of them in terms of Zoyger and the East Branch Library, but the rest of the items that are on that list, what are their priorities going to be, and what new priorities are out there? Because this is where, in effect, this board gets its input into what do you think needs to happen.
What's been the status of the capital budget for the county as a whole over these last, say, 4 years? When this, I guess it's been a stalemate basically on any kind of funding.
I think partially it was a stalemate, and in the funding because of the economic downturn, but the county was also in the midst of the massive addition that was done on the courthouse. That's one of the biggest
Yeah.
capital projects the county.
That's what it
has
sucked up
undertaken.
all the priorities to get
So
that completed.
that having just finished up last month, in effect creates potential for some additional projects down the road. And again, I think that's something I'm hoping Wanda Green will talk with us about next week, is what she is seeing in terms of her projections for what the future is going to look like over the next few years. But what Fran and I have been looking at that's on the list in front of you essentially is amounting to a backlog. And if you can look at pretty much any item on that list, we can tell you when it got on there and how many times it has not been funded in prior budgets. So you're really looking at things here that have no prior funding commitments on.
So I'm curious if the tax, the 4 cents CRA has been collected for 2014, but there's no project scheduled on fiscal year 2014. So does that mean we have a little bit extra money? Because the taxes for 2015 will pay for these things, supposedly.
I think you'll know, and you probably are not even going to know that next week. Property taxes were due January 6th, so most of the collections will be in, but certainly not all of them.
Theoretically, could that be the case?
I'd say it's theoretical. It'll be probably be another few weeks before the tax department presents a figure. But again, Wanda will know that.
So I should ask Wanda that question.
You should ask Wanda, that, because it's a 3.5 cent levy for the CRA. And that 3.5 cents was to carry the expenses of, in effect, the recreation and library programs through this year. So part of what we'll be doing is once we get a good estimate on what the collections are for this year, it's this year's collections that will fund next year, is my understanding.
So a couple of thoughts I'm having are that if you, again, not familiar enough with the county budget process to understand all this, but from a conceptual point of view, if you took the position that the county budget is county authorization and budget, let's say it's based on 100 value, we have 3.5 cents per 100 authorized here. And there's, what, 50 or 60 cents per 100 for the county budget as a whole. And then there are other tax sources and so forth. So from a conceptual point of view, when you look at the way the county deals with capital, what I'm guessing they do is they pull aside a certain amount of money that says, okay, this lot of money is going to be used for major projects like the courthouse or schools or whatever it is they're building. And so you've been in this 4-year hiatus on capital going toward this purpose for, obviously a good reason, but you've had limited capital money probably because of the economy. So now this CRA comes into effect, and we've moved all the operational support in this 3.5 cents per 100 over here to this pot. One question I've got is, does it cut this off from the capital capacity that's still residing over here? You see what I'm asking? Because this may be operating all the operating support for this, but does it really address the capital access that's needed to deal with these kinds of projects?
That's a question for Wanda.
Yeah.
Because you're basically talking about self-sufficiency.
Yeah, I just don't know if that's for anybody's talking about that. I'm sure they're thinking about it, but it's just something we need to find to clarify.
Because it's essentially, at the 3.5 cent tax rate, the way the projections are for this fiscal year, that level is set at a level that is sufficient to support current operations. There's not much growth in there. So if the CRA starts taking on capital projects and the county charges the debt service for those projects to the CRA tax, then that's where I think your question becomes quite relevant, because if that CRA tax is to support all CRA projects, then in effect, yes, you may not have access to the larger taxing authority of the county. So how that gets developed, if those decisions have been made, I don't know what they are yet. And I suspect those will be
Hey,
part of
I
that.
apologize,
Hey, good
my
morning.
calendar had 9.
How you doing?
Good,
Good
how's
morning.
everybody?
Good to see you.
Sorry about that.
So, anyway, my question for Wanda Green, my guess right now is those will be part of the ongoing budget discussions that'll happen this year. And ultimately, that's a Board of Commissioners decision.
Sure. Yeah.
Where does debt service come into this? Are
Well-
we spending the money before we?
If for example, debt is issued to say build a replacement pool for Zoyter, depending on how that debt is charged, in effect, what the term of the loan is. And I'm trying to remember the figure. If you borrow $1 million, it's how much per year?
Do not remember. It's broken down as percentage, but you can look at your chart here and see, to get an idea of what the, to get
Just the mortgage, basically.
4%.
And over time, typically what the county does is they ladder that debt so that in any given year, a certain amount is paid off, which creates the potential that you can start a new project and take on it.
Ellen, the question that sort of goes to this conversation was if you think about the CRA having a 3.5% authority, which kind of covers the operational support for the operation of these
Right.
facilities, how does the capital budget get addressed, and how does that relate to the overall county budget, which has been historically covering all capital expenditures?
Right, and like the debt for the county, to break it down, it's the equivalent of, we had a $200,000 house and a $65,000 mortgage. So that's an overly simplistic way to put it, but that shows you, I mean, the county is in very good shape. And Wanda is a master, and she's getting ready to go borrow more money because some other debt is being retired. But for capital projects, it would have to, the commissioners would have to approve that.
So that remains in the county budget, basically.
As far as I understand, for capital projects.
And that's the way it seems to
Yeah,
make sense.
it's my understanding, because the CRA doesn't have the resources too. And the CRA can't borrow money
Right.
for the county. So that, because the CRA can't borrow money, the commissioners would.
I don't know what we really could sort of do that's by bond, but we have to still get the approval of the commissioners to do a bond, for any kind of debt.
Yeah, the statute prohibits the CRA from borrowing money
Right.
other than by a bond vote, and that is
Right.
rarely, if ever, done.
I don't really, I could, yeah.
But, for example, the county would probably, again, question for Wanda Green, but the county would probably be, in effect, the agent for any borrowing by the CRA. I guess the decision that would have to be made by the Board of Commissioners if debt is issued for a CRA project is
Okay,
the debt
that's
service
right.
going to be charged to the 3.5-cent CRA tax.
And that would essentially put the burden back on the CRA for carrying the capital projects, which is where it gets a little interesting philosophically.
I think it's my understanding that, the way this was developed, there is some wiggle room within the amount of money, from what Wanda's told me. There's some wiggle room, but, again, that would have to be revisited.
So theoretically, what happens, I guess, is that this authority, the CRA authority, racks and stacks capital projects from our perspective, and then they go to the commissioners as a whole to be racked and stacked within the entirety of capital projects for the county,
That's my
in terms of
understanding.
deciding
Yeah.
what's going to really be done.
That would be my understanding
Yeah.
as well. So I think what, I guess Fran and I and Steve are looking at is potentially being different with the CRA structure versus what we've worked with in the past as a departmental structure, is that the CRA board itself will be making recommendations to the commissioners.
Right.
For capital projects, but as far as the other things the CRA supports, that would be, that was the whole point of the CRA to start with, that those decisions would be made and take the politics out of it and
Yeah.
made within the CRA.
And I suspect all will be much clearer come June.
Yeah.
One question I heard you ask, Matt, that I will get for you is what capital or projects we've had in the last 10 years that we've done, I think, which would help give a little more history
Yeah, that would be helpful.
from a park standpoint, and not very many. The latest project was probably 4 years ago, which was the redo of the installation of the soccer fields out at Carpet off Reeves Creek. And so I will get you that, so you'll have the years and you'll.
Can you include the possibility, or can you possibly include the expiration of any of this, how it affects the CRA, of any of this debt? So
Yes.
we can plan even.
At this point, we have none
Okay,
on the projects that have been done, have been funded by the county and.
I see, so there's no debt.
And the debt that is in the CRA budget right now would be library projects. It's literally
I get a text on that about the debt service.
the late 1990s, we've done an average of one library project almost every other year. Either new branch buildings or branch renovations and replacements.
So there is debt associated with those libraries?
There is still some debt associated with those
Yeah.
libraries.
So that'd be nice, yeah, to know when they expire. So we'll move on to the discussion of priorities. Okay. Well, I think you know what my priorities are. I've stated them earlier. I think pushing the Greenway implementation up from 2016 would be great. And I say that only because I know that there's people in the community that support this more so than probably any other thing. Recently, the Downtown Association was polling, I know it's not the county issue, but it is. Their number one priority was greenways. This is people that live downtown probably don't benefit from greenways as much as they're not downtown. But they see that the connection between greenways and quality of life and attracting tourists and the people who live here. There's a health survey coming out to the county, I believe, we'll probably have that as a high priority as well, getting people out and exercising. So as far as one of my main goals is to improve the health of the community, and I think getting people out to the parks and greenways is the way to do that. As well as things like mission and their fit for life and getting people to do better. It's synergistic, but I do believe that greenways is a huge part that we are missing right now in our community.
Are you referring specifically to the implementation of
That's
the
correct.
master plan, that 500,000?
That's correct. And that's sort of vague too. I don't know, what does that exactly mean? What part of the master plan? I mean, I guess we'll talk in specifics later, but I would like to know what those specifics are. Maybe the CRA can develop more of a roadmap for what those specifics are.
Well, there are two of those under 2016. And one is referred to as Greenway Planning. The other one is implementation. Both for $500,000. What is the distinction? Yeah, I guess that's the question I have too.
I think part of the Greenway Master Plan is extensive and countywide, and it does not have other than a very, very, very ballpark price tag
Yeah, I
attached
was
to
gonna
it.
say, yeah.
So this is design.
Yes, and I think a part of that planning would be starting to establish the priorities of what areas of the Greenway Plan are going to be targeted first, because it's probably not feasible to be talking about the entirety of that plan. You're going to focus on a link this year, a link next year, and build it in effect, step by step by step. And that's the work that needs to happen first. So that would be the piece to make, I think,
The other part happened.
to make the other part happen, because we don't know what that full implementation would cost.
I think there was such ambiguous numbers in here, because without the first part, we don't know what the second part would be. And wanted to sit back and see or would get it at first, and then capital
The CRA.
would pay that service.
And part of Matt is also looking at, in my opinion, with the greenways, is all the other initiatives and all the other municipalities or groups that are working on greenways, and start to connect the different pieces that they're working on with the county's master
Absolutely.
plan that's done. And there's good work being done by a lot of different groups, and linking those and working with priorities, I think is a huge piece that we're working on pretty actively right now. The whole linking and being out there to talk about that, work on the rapid health impact assessment as part of as an addendum piece to the Greenway Master Plan for exactly those reasons. What impact will greenways have on health in Buncombe County? So a really nice piece of work that also highlights the importance and the advantages that the greenways would have to help the community.
Who's doing the health assessment?
It was done by Don Kostelek, and it's, probably need to get you that, it just was rolled out, I don't know, maybe today, to
Yeah.
the Health Advisory.
Right, right. And-
That's the
and
one
it-
I was referring to.
Yes.
And have you seen the county's, well, one, it's woven into the land use plan, but also, why am I forgetting?
The sustainability, is that the
Yeah,
one?
and it's all, and you should see the sustainability plan, because it's all woven into that as well.
So I'd be curious to, what is the background on who the county's talking to, what groups are participating? I know some of them already, but it'd be nice to meet with some of those folks and talk about what is possible with their help to make this a true public-private issue.
It could be some of that private support ends up affecting those priorities among the areas of the plan.
Well, that was what I was getting at.
Back to-
I was thinking,
get back to that
where
first
do we have
comment.
to
Help
have that?
incentivize some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be nice to have that. That would, I would say is a priority as well, is to find out if we can have some sort of pot of money that can be used.
Oh, we can definitely have that, I mean, that's, when you look at all this, all these goals are dependent on, like, the pool. To me, the way to do that in an effective way is to partner with Mission, we need partners.
One question I've got logistically, I know in our work, we have, I think of this as like design or site design or whatever. When you're going from sort of your master plan down to your site design detail, then you go into your bidding and implementation and all that. I'm wondering whether or not you've got all that, you've got both the design and the implementation in one fiscal year over a 12-month period. In an ideal situation, what I'd like to see is the planning design take place soon, advanced planning, and be prepared to go into 2016 with the ability to let contracts and go build.
Yes.
So if you could somehow find a way to move that $500,000 up to 2015, it's probably getting crowded up there. But it would be,
The
it'd
debt
be a better
service on that's pretty
logistical
low.
strategy. Huh?
I'm sorry, the debt service on that would be pretty low.
Yeah.
You're talking about
Yeah.
$36,000 is the debt service.
Right.
Yeah,
That would
this
free
actually
you up
costs
then
me.
to start all this whole process of designing and getting community engagement and all that. Like it'd be a better logistical strategy.
Yeah, I agree that planning work needs to happen soon, because everything else will ultimately follow from that. So I would,
And to me, like, Black Mountain has, one of the new mayor's goals is to implement the Greenway plan. So, everybody's bringing some resources to the table. It's not just county taxpayers that are,
I think it would
because
be-
I think Black Mountain has some grants too that they're working with.
And theoretically, people that live in Black Mountain are county taxpayers, so they,
No,
It's
what
not
I meant
stretched.
by that was as far as things to the table, Black Mountain's worth a lot to get grant money.
But I would recommend that might be a motion from the committee.
So would.
Second.
We don't have a chairman yet, so
There we go. Yeah.
we're kind of free
Right.
form.
I think that's good.
We might-
Yeah.
We might want to do that, sure. Is there-
Ellen, would you like to go next? What your priorities are?
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay.
To me, the greenways are incredibly important, and, that's something, I don't really believe those numbers. I think those numbers are, I can't imagine they would be that high.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think, but, to me, when you look at health and wellness, it all folds into one, and, I was a happy member at the YW, and when I saw all the needs that pool met, with such a cross section of the community, and then the library, so, but I think the greenways are, pretty strong with greenways.
One way you could do this too, I'm not sure, I assume we have the ability to look at this in its entirety, but one way to think about this is design fees are typically, in our case, they usually range, low, maybe 10%, but for a project like this, maybe they're as high as 15% for the design component. So you could take this $1 million that's in here for greenways and basically fund in 2015 the design component, take 150, let's say, and put it in 2015, and then take 850 and make it your 2016 component for construction or implementation of that the design.
As we're getting deeper into the budget that we'll present later on, we'll come up with a more precise figure for that design study. The numbers you see right here on the CIP are almost entirely, they're placeholder numbers.
Yeah.
They're not, in most cases, this would certainly not hard cost figures.
Yeah, and I agree with Ed, until we do one, we're shooting, we don't know, have any idea what the other.
That's true. And to say that my priorities are greenways is, that's with the knowledge that we've already prioritized the Zorger Pool and the East Asheville Library.
Right, yeah,
This is,
that's,
saying
yeah,
those aren't
I wouldn't,
important.
yeah, thank you for,
One of the things that I'm sure we'll be doing with Greenways is because on staff we have a Greenway planner, is we'll be offering her expertise to, in fact, any group or any of the municipalities that want to work with Connect Buncombe, which is the Greenway
Right.
Master Plan. So I think the trick here, and probably one of the first stages, first pieces of that, of the serious design study for Greenways, is going to be identifying the ones that can be built most effectively first. Because again, you're looking at a plan
Right.
that covers the entire, virtually the entirety of the county. So setting the priorities within that plan.
But I think also, it'd be interesting to go out into communities and find out from folks, you know, you may see a stronger interest in greenways in Black Mountain than you would Sandy Mush. And find out where they're, you know, it'd just be interesting to get that feedback. And
I think it will also help to know what groups are already working on. Like say the Design Center, or the Connect Buncombe, or the Friends of Hominy Valley, or whoever it may be, that already have some things together. Like the Friends of Hominy Valley already have a plan, I'm pretty sure. I know it's in the city limits, but, you know, it's, there are those kind of groups that are going
Right.
to help prioritize this.
I wonder how much that's incorporated in the Land of Scotch Grove WNC project too. They did a lot of
Right.
community forums.
Yeah.
yeah,
I wonder if it's something we even should be responsible for, but possibly get all these groups together. Logistically, I'm not, you give me some feedback, it's just I'm just throwing this out. Get all these groups together and talk about who's doing what. You may have already done this, Fran, or Ed, I don't know. But it seems to me that's a good starting point, because then you find out who's working on what. Get all the information together and then make our decision.
There are some, there are some conversations that are happening now, so and I think that would be one of the absolute first steps in putting together, in effect, the implementation plan for the Greenway plan, would be having those conversations.
I think what's unfortunate, it's been so politicized. Right.
I think, yeah.
I don't know any of the background to that. I mean, I've read the press, that sort of thing, but is it improbable or impractical to think that we could start the advanced planning through a design contract where someone would be charged with doing a needs assessment and handling these kinds of conversations, and identifying what's on the plan field, and begin the design process now? If it was a small amount of money.
I really think you could, because there are groups, as Matt was saying, there are groups out there who are already working on this. There's the Friends of Connect Buncombe group, which Ann Babcock chairs, which we're meeting with them next week.
Right.
So I think some of the community support infrastructure is there. Probably the trick is going to be identifying within that master plan some reason, in effect, some achievable priorities, and that those priorities, in effect, are spread around enough so that the community at large is not buying into it. In other words, at some point, somebody does need to start building Greenway.
Well, that's kind of my thinking. If we could move into the leadership role by replacing the contract, doing a designer selection, having that contract underway, then we basically take it out of the realm of it's in now to a purposeful design process. Is there? You mentioned earlier what's going on in 2014. Is there any prospect of that kind of?
Well, 2014 ends in 6 months.
Yeah, we're
done.
Yeah,
We don't have any ability to get money.
So it has to be 2015.
we really are looking at things that will be funded after July.
Okay.
Well, when we say 15, we actually mean July 13, so it's not as
Right.
far off as
Right,
it
right.
sounds.
So we have a motion and a second. Maybe I ought to clarify that and just give it a quick bit. I think the motion basically is to move the priority for advanced planning of the Greenway system into 2015 priority list, but not at the expense of the previous two priorities.
Right.
Is that a correct way to say it?
Yes.
Do you agree with that? Since you second. Gotta have my support.
Yeah. But I think it's important to meet with, or know what the left hand and the right hand need to know what they're doing, because
Sure.
to me, that's the best way to save money and not spend money.
And I think between now and July 1 would be the time to do that.
Mhm.
Well, it's gotta be before July 1, it's gotta be,
Yes. So,
by about April.
sure, so it gets.
That's for the budget, for the
Yeah.
budget process. But what we need for that is to come up with a cost for what that study is going to be. You know, we have to set the scope of what that study is going to be, and then some estimates of what it will cost.
And I play a little bit of a devil's advocate in that before we commit money to a study, find out
I agree.
what's been studied already.
Yes,
Mhm.
I agree. Because it may be that there's enough people out there working on this that that is
Yeah.
our priority. We don't have to hire anybody to tell
Right,
us what it
that's
is.
right, yeah. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, why spend money on something that somebody else is doing for free?
right. Or somebody's already paying money for,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
As somebody new coming in with into Greenway planning, assessing cost figures is extremely difficult because every single piece you look at is going to be very different.
Right.
Sure.
Both in terms of property acquisition, what the actual lay of the land is. So that's where, to really get serious, we have to have the ability to, for example, if a group approaches us for assistance on a particular project, we have to have the ability to go in and actually come up with what a reasonable cost estimate is going to be.
Mhm.
So I think we understand.
Yeah, so we should probably try to get together with those folks in February, end of January.
The Connect Buncombe group is meeting, the Friends of Connect Buncombe, and they meet monthly. They meet at the library next Wednesday, so we'll be with Fran and I'll be meeting with them then.
I'd like to go to that meeting. You could send me an email.
It's at 12 o'clock next Wednesday.
And it's at,
It's at Pack Library
Okay.
in the downstairs meeting room.
I think I have a Landis guy meeting, but I don't know.
Do we need to vote on our little action? We don't have a chair yet, so we have to.
Well,
I
just-
would
Make
recommend you elect a chair. We'll get that done.
I keep throwing this out.
It's like 5 times.
I'd like to nominate Matt.
Yeah,
Second.
yeah, there we go. Yeah.
I'm not sure Robert's is all entangling our procedure right now.
We'll start that after there's a chair.
Is Matt accepting?
Yes, I'll accept that.
Okay. You want to call for it?
We should.
So, all in favor of the,
Aye.
all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? All right, passes.
Well, the future's bright.
That amounted to a draft.
That's right. Yeah.
Were there other, I heard, what I captured, Matt, right away, you talked about greenways, and then past that, we had a conversation of Ellen talking about looking at what else was going on, and also talking in communities. And then George, we worked on the planning design phase in 15, and then 16 start the implementation. Are there other priorities, or there, Eleanor?
I wanted to ask if we want yet to start thinking about where we'll be 10 years from now, 15 years from now. We want to start a mechanism, a process for thinking about that.
Usually that thing, sort of thing's done at some sort of retreat where you can just focus
Yeah.
on that sort
Right.
of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's.
And I think,
probably what we
let's
should do.
recommend that for after June.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
because it'll take a lot of staff preparation.
You know, the short term, we have the CIP. In
Yeah.
the short term, that tells us where we're going, but I
Right.
know what you're saying, where do we want to be in 10 years?
This takes us for 5 years.
It's kind of like we have the urgent and the important in
Right.
some ways. Like the important thing, I think, is really what is the opportunity that's offered by joining all these features of the county, and what kinds of things can we do that we haven't ever really been able to do maybe yet.
Yeah.
And how do we relate to what the city is doing
Yeah, sure.
or wants to do?
Yeah, so it's probably your wife's later in the year.
Sure. So we table that, but I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Definitely look into that later meeting. Planning. Do you have other priorities as far as specific
No,
items? George, how about you?
No, I think I agree with what's here. Okay. The only place I'm still kind of interested personally is this $30 million project on the pools and all that. I mean, it's like the gorilla in the midst of this list. So
Yes.
it's sort of lingering out there in 2017, but it's going to be a site visit.
I think, I was talking to Brownie about that, and a couple of others. I think for that, one, I think we should not say aquatic center. I think we need to come up with a different name. Because aquatic center, I think to taxpayers, really sounds horrible. So I think we have to think of a different name, but I think for that, it's such a big thing, I think we need to get committee, not necessarily involved with all of the CRA, but outside people that, you know, that can reach out to Mission, that can reach out to the YW. Because in order for us to do that and have it be really, really good, and as big as we want it to be, we need outside partners. What do you guys think?
I tend to question from what we talked about, and that we're going to be replacing this Oregon pool, I tend to think that this large of an expense, how else could we benefit the community more diversely than spending that much money on one item? And is there really a need for it when there's an aquatic center in Kingsport? Maybe there is.
Oh,
Asphalt is much more a destination than Kingsport. I can assure you.
I think there's a tremendous need for it, and Kevin Costner, if you build it, they'll come. When you look at the use of the YW, when you look at, and Fran can talk better to this, but when you look at what's being utilized now and really underutilized, there's a tremendous interest, I think, in it. And I think it's something, to me, it's like the other part of the greenways in the sense of health and wellness from tiny to seniors. And, you know, that's the biggest thing I observed at the YW. I mean, you know, the teeny little YW and how it's.
That's where my children took their swimming.
Yeah, and, you know, you go from the toddlers taking swimming lessons to the silver sneakers, and then you get to the competitive part. Then I think it's a real need. And I think it would be incredibly well used.
You know, I guess the reason I'm thinking about that is because I'm still sort of caught up philosophically on the whole capital question here. Because I think really it's going to be, to a certain extent, the capital capacity in the long run that's going to allow us to really implement a long-range plan and create some of these kinds of amenities. And the question I had heard before you got here was, if you sort of think about the CRA as an entity of that scale, and you look at the county over here at this scale, what's tended to happen is the county has taken out, you know, some component of its budget to allocate toward capital. And so when the CRA is set up with a 3.5 cents authority, the philosophical basis for saying, okay, the CRA is going to pick up the service of the capital, it's really saying that there's been now a separation between this historic pot of money for capital development, and this has been funded basically for sort of operational development, but yet it's having to pick up any access to this. So I think there's a need to really think through that and discuss it, because it's going to inhibit this.
Well, and I think, you know, when we first started talking about the CRA, I don't think we ever had a meeting without the idea of outside money. And the other aspect too is, initially, it was to be with all the municipalities, and with the ability to go up to 7%. I don't think the reality is there that that's going to happen determined by the legislature about the municipalities. But I only say all that because there would be more revenue in. Because, and then the other part of it is, the question too is, when the municipalities come in, how does the county handle that? I mean, if other municipalities want to come in, do they give their titles over to the CRA? You know, historically, the county taxpayers have spent a lot of money on things, and then sometimes they get taken away. So I think all that has to be ironed out, but it's a long way to say that when this was first started, the idea was that there would be more revenue there.
Right.
And I think now we're kind of in a holding pattern with that 3.5 cents until June.
If I can jump back just a little bit,
Yeah.
if you're okay with it. The way the aquatic pool concept ended up on the list was the advisory committee for the Parks, Greenways, and Recreation back in 2008. And when they were talking to community groups, the thing that has continued to bubble up since 1990 has been the need for more pools. Therapeutic, recreational, competitive, water safety proofing our children, infant toddler lessons, teaching, like training lifeguards, training facilities for water rescuing and things. So it came up with a whole big thing. For the first time, I totally hear what you're saying about aquatic center. I totally,
And I'm not
it just struck me that way. Instead of talking about health and safety and wellness, it sounds more like a place to go and play.
right, or
Yeah.
elite.
Or, yeah.
So, but, yeah.
So I heard that when we go back, and we went through the years, and at our next committee, at our next time we meet, if you'd like, I'll bring you kind of an idea of all the different kinds of inputs that have happened through the years with pools, back to when Buncombe County operated Recreation Park, the pool out there, and the study that was done in 1995 to talk about what do you do with recreation, with that pool. Again, that was when Buncombe County had that pool and operated it, and to look at what was the best use, what do you do moving forward? Do you close it, do you make it an 8-lane, do you make it a 6-lane, do you make it a 25-yard, do you make it 50-meter, how do you do that? And so a lot of studies way back, as far back, that were probably no longer useful except as historical knowledge, and maybe that would be a good place to go also at a time to talk about that and what we've done through the years to look at other ways to build community pools, neighborhood pools, or to build a center or a facility, whether you call it a recreation center. And so there's lots of different things, yes.
And I think that's the only thing on our list that has any economic, could be any return economically. I mean, I think if we had a competitive place, people would come. It's like a soccer.
So one of the things, when one of the last groups met, when we had Mission Hospital and AV Tech and UNCA and what was Tom's
Right.
peer partners all at the table, was also the need for therapy space,
Right.
therapy pools.
Right.
And
How far did those conversations go with them, with all of them?
we were, had a lot of conversations, looking at properties, talking about how, well, another reason it got on the capital
Yeah.
plan. And then we hit 2007 and
Right.
the group just disbanded.
It would be good to get them back at the table, I would think.
But it was a time when there was a lot of interest in putting all the different pieces together, not just around competitive swimming.
Right.
But around a lot of the things that maybe Aquatic Center doesn't say it quite as much.
Like a wellness center.
Yeah,
Yeah.
health and wellness or safety and wellness or
Water wellness.
water
Yeah.
wellness.
But, yeah, I mean, I think it,
So if that's an area that might be of interest, Mr. Chairman, to the group, that we might look at those in more
Right.
detail at a future meeting.
because we had, the commissioners met with Mission and Paulus, and at the tail end, Joe brought up about the pool. And it was a total change of subject, but we had a very somber conversation. But there is interest there.
If you think look at the conflicts like they have in Haywood County, it's more holistic. It's really more about wellness. It's pool, which meets the needs of the schools, and the things that are going on there, but it's just so much more grand. They have walking trail internally, and it's right on their park property, so there's soccer fields and ball fields, volleyball. They also have a full gym that's used for a lot of children activities. Pilates classrooms and aerobic classrooms, yoga classrooms. Plus, their general, same type of equipment like the Y has in relation to just general health.
Right.
Windmills. It's more holistic, but yet still in a compact variety, so you're
They call theirs the rec
center
center.
at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a nice facility.
It is a nice facility.
There's cross-utilization of different sports at the same time, where you can increase your overall utilization. That's
I'd like
really
to
a
see,
good
that'd
model.
be cool to see.
Yeah, it's
Would
nice.
that, would that be one you'd be interested in?
I would, yeah. I'm a close traveler.
She'll travel to Haywood County.
Yeah. I learned my.
Field trip.
Yeah, we, there was some interest in putting, a transfer station for rail in Swananoa. And, so there was one in, Knoxville. And so we were kind of told a lot of things that really didn't come to fruition. But, and the transfer station was gonna be $5 million, and supposedly Norfolk Southern was gonna, it was kind of funny. So Norfolk Southern was gonna buy in, and this and that, so what we learned in the very early morning ride to Knoxville was, no, Norfolk Southern, they just thought that that would be something the county would do. So we go up there, and we're in the middle of nowhere, and we get there, and I'm looking out at this very flat land with tracks, and some empty cars, and then they're talking about who's going to apply the, who's going to be the EMT if there's a problem, and oh, there's not enough hard hats for us. I'm like, we're walking from here to there. What's going to happen? We can run. But anyway, so we're
Mobility.
so we're looking, and Wanda and I kind of look at each other, because suddenly it dawns on both of us at the same time, Norfolk Southern has no interest in doing this. This would be something that we would do. And then I said, so how much is it? How much would you pay for each car to come through? And the guy said $85. I said, okay then. I was ready to get back in the car, but ever since then I'm like, I'm not going on a field trip unless it's really $85 a car for a $5 million investment.
Well, is there any other conversation on priorities? Anything from staff you'd like to?
I have a thought that I think I'm just pondering. I don't know how it works in your scheme of things, but, you know, in our scheme of things, one of the things that's been probably the most frustrating for me at the Arboretum in building a series of projects, you know, toward a goal, is the inability with the funding models that we have in some situations to be able to be unable to go into advanced planning and design and have that in place so that you're able to go immediately into construction. What frequently happens to us is we end up getting an allocation, let's say, for a project. Then we've got to do we're doing that now, we've got to do the design work, and then we've got to hurry it up so we can get, it's just like your project that you know, Wild Wings. You got to hurry up because you got the season coming, you got all these other pressures. And somehow, if we could make it easier by putting more emphasis on advanced planning and design so that you can do that as a thing unto itself, and even take it up to design development, where you really aren't doing working plans and all that, but you take it through the early design process, you do all your user assessment and so forth, and you've got the project ready to go. So as soon as you get the ability to get into the next fiscal year, you can go straight into working drawings and bidding and construction. To me, that would be an ideal. But some of these projects like this that are 2 or 3 years out, it would be nice to look at them perhaps as a design and an implementation pairing. But I don't know how it works with the commissioners and the budgeting and how your system works out on some of that. May not be a practical.
It's hard to budget when you don't know for. Like, when we did, the planning for Isaac Dixon and, the middle school, there was probably, I want to say, in 11, the architects were, dispatched to come up with the drawings and the models, and then they were given money for that. And then, until they do that, we didn't know how much it was going to be to plan in the budget. So it was that. And then there was some negotiating after that, but it was probably a couple of years, but the amount of money that we were talking about, you couldn't really say, oh, once we're done with this, we're part of that, because one was 20 million and one was 35 million.
In a
Does
lot
that
of,
make any sense?
in a lot of cases with, particularly with library projects, the trigger for moving a project forward is once you've identified the site. And I can see that, for example, very much with an aquatics facility of any sort. To do any serious planning, you have to know where you're going to put it. So that has tended to be a first piece,
Right.
because then it also becomes possible to start talking about seriously with potential donors. Everyone knows what we're talking about and where it's going to be.
Right.
And I think that piece, more often than not, has been.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well,
There's a big difference in my situation with
Right.
yours, is I have,
Yeah.
mine's already established.
And I've
Right.
seen that move a project, meaning
Yeah.
a project will move to a higher place on the list simply because the site's been identified, there seems to be a general consensus developing that this is what and where it should be, so it will move ahead of projects that were actually in on the list.
Well, and the other thing, like back to the schools, county schools, because of Article 39 has their own funding source, it comes from sales tax, so it's not an issue of borrowing money for them, the money is there. Whereas the city schools don't have that, so then it's a different funding stream.
I think what Ed was saying is absolutely exactly what happened at the Lake Julian extension. That piece, this piece was there, it was already on lease, but we went getting it, it could happen quickly and with a partner. So it just went,
Yeah. And I think that's where the public partners come in, is if they are designing these and they have something, as far as greenways are concerned, I don't work with an aquatic center or a library, but I think that will be able to help us. 'Cause it's easier to build a trail through the woods than it is a building, we all know that. Not as easy as you'd think.
Yeah.
And
And I think
I've done that over the years, it's not.
what helped so much with the ASHO, and Keith, just was able to describe how he was gonna do it, that made it much more, no pun intended, concrete. I mean,
Okay, any other discussion on priorities? We probably need to set our next meeting date, time.
And do we want to try to make that the trip to Winslow?
I wonder if, we also have to try to get together with these groups that we're talking about, like Friends of Buncombe and other groups that you all may know of, and we may know of, that want to be at the table and talk about this.
I think in the case of Friends of Connect London, they had made a request
They did.
to Chairman Gann for agenda time, and I think we were looking at possibly that being March.
and I don't remember the
But
date.
anyway, that's already been broached.
Okay, so they wanted to meet with a full
They asked for that, and it may make more sense to have them meet with this committee. And that's something I think the board could talk about.
Yeah, maybe we'll ask them Wednesday when we're there, possibly. So as far as the next meeting, do we go to Wednesday or not? I mean, I'm up for that. I think we could,
I can do it if it's in a month on a Wednesday.
on a Wednesday.
Mhm.
Let's see. What is a month Wednesday?
It would be,
Fifth, 12th, 19th, and 26th.
so a month from today would be, I'm sorry, Thursday, I'm sorry.
Exactly, I thought today was Thursday.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm open any of those Thursdays.
When is the next CRA meeting? Before we-
The CR, after next week, it'll be, the next one will be whatever, February 11th.
Okay, so we could do the 6th, it's the Thursday prior to that. We'll say 8:30 versus 8 o'clock.
They're open, yeah, they're open.
how long will it take to get there?
30 minutes.
30 minutes, yeah.
40,
Yeah.
This is in, it is in Waynesville.
If we're meeting at the rec center,
So
then
we
we
meet
should
there.
probably meet at 9. But if we're meeting here at Carpool,
So we meet here at 8:30 or something of that sort.
yeah, we could meet in the parking lot.
You want to see here? We could,
I can fit 4 in my car.
all right, let's just rendezvous here
Yeah.
at 8:30. We'll work the car out,
Okay.
whether we need one or two. Because we probably ought to tell everybody else we're doing it in case they want to come along.
Yeah.
Right. I think once people hear, they're gonna need a busload.
Waynesville?
And what's the name of this facility?
Waynesville Recreation Center.
I wonder if they got any federal money.
Nice to
That
know.
facility's what, 14 years old? I think it was built on, I think it was a town bond, but
Yeah, they had some contributions locally. Look at kind of minimal.
What time would you just say we'll get back, so I can block out that?
I would say we should be back by 11:30, 11:30. And the director is a former Buncombe County Recreation staff member named Rhett Langston. He's
Oh.
a nice guy.
Okay, so we'll meet the 6th of February, 8:30 here in the parking lot.
Yeah.
We'll go to Wednesday. All right, with that, I guess we are adjourned.
A road trip.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And I do,
And I apologize for my
I
calendar.
do put that out just as a general proviso. If it's a day the city schools are closed.
Yes.
We don't meet, so.
Yeah,